Alright everyone, today's video is Monster Design 1. And it's the first in a series of mini videos on how to design better monsters. And I'm making this because I see all these videos online about how to make all this homebrew, items, spells, races, classes, everything, right? Campaign setting, everything. But I don't see enough love for homebrew monsters and how to do it. So that's what I'm making this video for. And there's four perspectives you really need to look out for. There's role, there's logical, story, and coolness. Right? And I'll go over each of those in turn. So I guess role perspective is what kind of role are you looking for this monster to fill, and you build it from that way. So there's the fighter who has to stop people from getting to the squishies, and then there's the cleric and the wizard who kind of keep everyone up and then stop anything like a fireball or wall of force from taking out the whole party. And this is oversimplified, but this is just kind of a quick explanation of what the roles are, right? That's what role perspective monster building is. And so there's those roles, and then there's the rogue, right, who does a lot of damage per round, high damage but not very sturdy. And those are four examples of roles, and of course there's sub roles and all those kind of different things that you want. But if you want a monster that's really tough physically, hard to put down, give him a decent armor class and a lot of hit points, right? So make it hard to hit him and give him a lot of hit points. And if you want him to hit hard too, give him a big weapon and a lot of damage. Now maybe if he's a big guy like an ogre, he can only make one attack per round. Or maybe if he's extremely skilled and got that lean muscle build, he can take 3 or 4 attacks per round for each good damage, but maybe he's got a higher armor class and less hit points, and then the ogre has more hit points but less of an armor class, just kind of balance everything out. And so that's kind of role building, is what kind of role do you want this monster to occupy within the monster's warband, right? That's just the term I'll use instead of adventuring party, because that's for PC. So it's adventuring party versus warband. So what role does he take in the warband? And you just got to think, okay, first of all, you can think from a logical perspective, what would this monster have? And then you also got to think, what role do I need to fill? And so I've touched on logical. What does that mean? Well, a logical build, I'm sorry about that, a logical build is one that's, this is a big hulking ogre. He's really easy to hit, but, he's got a lot of health, right? So that's kind of a low armor class, high hit point build, and he's super muscular, so, he's hitting really hard with these very simple weapons, right? Because I'm pretty sure ogre, as far as monster manual goes, it just gets a great club, but it deals a lot of damage like a great club because it's so strong. So that's logical building, is what would this guy have, and you build the monster out from there. So we've covered role, we've covered logical. So from a story perspective, that's kind of along the lines of, what is this monster taking in my story? So I had ones that I made, I called them the Weavers. They were based off of the Anise, the Knight, and the Green Hag, and they were a coven in the woods, and they were supposed to be really powerful with divination magic. And so I had them have foresight on all of them, which I know it's a 9th level spell, but I didn't really care. I just gave them advantage on their attack rolls and disadvantage on attack rolls against them, because that's part of what they were in the story. And I also gave them some pretty good legendary actions dealing with that. They were kind of able to predict what was going to happen. So if the fighter was going to land a really good strike, I gave them a legendary action of just the dodge. Just one attack misses, they just sidestep it completely. I gave them more spell casting, right? Because your monsters often get beat in the action economy by the players. You kind of want the players to feel overwhelmed at times by your monsters if they're an overwhelming monster. So I gave them just a legendary action every round of casting a spell, right? So they've got their dodge move, they got their spell casting, and then finally there was one that was the Anise Hag, and she was supposed to be a brute, so I gave her an extra attack, right? She's got her one attack, and then during her legendary actions, she could choose to take another strike. And so that was kind of how legendary actions fit into that one. But from the story perspective, I based the Hag's abilities off of how they were supposed to A, make the players feel, and B, their supposed combat capabilities, right? Because the divination magic, and then how tough they were, because they're supposed to be a big boss. Now, here's a pro tip. Feel free to give them as many feats as you want, because for one thing, I feel feats are overrated in how much damage they can deal, right? Because if you throw on a Great Whip and Master Tune, yeah, that's a big difference. But Is it a TPK in the making? I usually don't think it's a TPK in the making. Now, 10 feats, well, depends on the feats you choose, but maybe if you want them to be faster and be able to hit harder when they're fast and give them good saves because of their shield, and you want them to have, Poleland Master and Sentinel, you can do all of that. You can do whatever you want to your monsters, right? So that's a story perspective is basing their abilities off of the role they fill in the story. And then the coolness perspective is one of my favorites. When you're homebrewing your monster from the coolness perspective, you've got to look at what would be pretty epic. So I remember I had zombies, right? And these weren't regular zombies. They were cut in half, so they were dragging themselves across the ground and making bite attacks. And it was a dark place, like it was not well lit, so the players could never identify them. So they would just, as they're going, something would bite their leg, make an attack roll, and I usually just make them hit, honestly. Like if they're in the dark, biting legs, and then so while they're fighting all these other monsters, they gotta watch out for these crawlers on the ground. And then at times the floor would just fall out as there were little kobolds moving things around underneath them. So as they're in the battlefield, sometimes they just drop and they're lower, and then the kobolds take a smack at their face. So that's kind of the coolness perspective. Like that would be a really cool combat. Kobolds under the ground just moving things, and you're falling, and then you get hits and that sort of thing, and maybe you fall and they grab your legs and you get dragged under and that kind of thing, and you're stuck in a tunnel. That'd be a really cool combat to be in. While it's a deadly combat, it would be a really cool combat to be in. So that's building from the coolness perspective. Now, you guys are probably looking for some mechanical answers. As far as the core 4, armor class, hit points. Sorry about that yawn, it's very unprofessional. It's just, I don't know, I've been yawning a lot lately. Armor class, hit points, attack, and damage, right? Those are the 4 numbers you need, but that's not going to work for every monster. So with a wizard, with a spellcast enemy, I just take this. I take the number of spell slots they have by level. So if it's 4 level 1, 3 level 2, and 3 level 3, I write 4, 3, and 3 down my line number page, and then I pick the spell that they're going to use at that level. Level 1 is almost always shield. Level 2 is something like Misty Step, and level 3, you really wanna hit hard with these monsters initially, all right? Because they don't have to go through the adventuring day like the players, so they can save all their power for that crazy right hook, or that fireball, like 3 fireballs raining down on a party. Like that's a crazy effect, and if you really want them to be afraid, use the big stuff first. Don't start with the magic missiles and then work your way up to the scorching rays, because by that time your monster's gonna be dead. Combat is over, usually maybe 10 rounds or less, and that's 10 rounds is a long combat. That's 10 turns for every single member. It's usually done in 5 rounds. Usually, I don't want to say every time, but usually it's done in 5 rounds. And so you've got to be saving their actions. You've got to be giving them extra actions, for one thing. You do that through legendary actions, to cast spells, make attacks. That's usually a full action, but just give them a legendary action to cast a spell. What's the worst that could happen? But you want to lead with those heavy spells, and you want to save the other spell slots for things that take out bonus action and reaction. They can be casting a fireball, teleporting them when the fighter tries to swing at them, they shield, right? That's 3 spells. They're burning through their resources, they're losing their power, but they're being very active in the battlefield. And so that's a pretty good thing to be, is a very active enemy in the battlefield, because I don't know if you know about boxing, but if you're just kind of sitting there still as stone, they're going to hit you really, you're going to get messed up. But if you're over here bobbing and weaving and slipping and all this good stuff, it's going to be a lot harder for them to hit you, because you're always moving around, you're always a moving target. So you kind of want your enemies to be, you want your monsters to be moving targets. So that's a little bit of the mechanical side. But just basically the role they are, you would adjust the hit points, you would adjust the damage, you would adjust the attack roll, just scale it up and down as far as you need it. Now, if you want me to say at level 1, they can have a maximum attack bonus of X, and they can have a maximum damage of Y. I can't say that, but here's a monster that I homebrewed myself personally. Is this Surge, and I just actually couldn't be bothered to look up Surge stats. So I said, all right, well, here's what I think. I think a Surge would be kind of hard to hit. I will go from armor class to hit points to attack to damage, because that's the way I always do my notes. So I think a Surge would be kind of hard to hit. I gave him a 15. 15 for the armor class, because that's supposed to be a decent armor class, right? If you look at you can almost think of armor class as difficulty class. and that if their check with modified by their weapon abilities, it is a proficiency. So you can almost think of it as a DC. You can almost think of it as armor class as a difficulty check, and if they pass their check, their attack hits. It's the same exact mechanic, is just named a little differently. So I gave him a 15, and that's a really good way to think about it, is to think of the armor class as the DC of how hard it is to hit them. So I gave him a 15 because I want him to be pretty hard hit. I gave him 1 hit point because I feel like if you have a sword and you hit a mosquito bat with it, which is basically what a Sturge is, it's going to go down. I gave him pretty high attack because he's going to be swooping down and just aiming for the neck. This is like an instinctive thing. He's got to be pretty good at it. And neck usually is relatively unarmored, right? And then I gave him pretty high damage too, because if you get stabbed by a giant stinger in the neck and it starts sucking blood out of you, that's gonna hurt. That's gonna hurt a lot. And then I made an emaciated wolf. This is all for the same dungeon. I made an emaciated wolf. So I said, all right, this guy's gonna be pretty easy to hit. He's a wolf. I'm gonna give him a DC of 13 for his armor class. As far as hit points, he's weaker than a regular wolf because he's so emaciated. So I'll give him, I don't know, 5 hit points. The average strike would bring him down. And then I said, but for the damage and the attack, oh, he's starving. He is crazy. He is rabid. I'm going to bump his attack and I'm going to bump his damage too, right? So those are 2 examples of monsters that I made. And I did both of those from the logical perspective. Now, a monster from the role perspective is a rogue that I made. So I had a combat where my players were all separated by a couple 100 feet. And they were fighting 5 baddies, so they were all separated, and the baddies kind of moved in and they fought them, but there was a third agent. There was a third faction at play here. And this person, they kind of just as the battle would go on, the players were going to lose. So the person was like, well, I don't want that to happen. So they kind of took selective shots at the enemies and at the PCs to kind of keep everyone's health points down and to keep the battle mostly balanced. And then when it kind of like she controlled things to where it came down to just the one PC and the one monster. And by that point, the PCs had figured out that there was someone shooting, right? She was a level 6 rogue with sharpshooter. So that's a really powerful creature. But the role she filled was just the DPS. So if they had actually been able to get to her, she was elevated and hidden. But if they'd been able to get to her, they probably would have beaten her pretty easily because she had lower armor class and low hit points, right? But from her position, she was able to wreak absolute havoc and control this battlefield totally. Because if anyone steps out of cover, then they would get shot for like 30 damage, usually 30 plus, because she had 3 sneak attack die, and then she had sharpshooter for another 10. And then she had +5 for dexterity, +2 for the weapon, and 1d8 for the weapon damage. Like, that's a lot of damage just like that. And she took it in reaction to you because she was holding her action to whenever someone would step out of cover, she would just shoot them, right? And I would still proc sneak attack because it's once per turn. So, she got her. That was her role. Her role was the rogue, and she was doing combat control. So that's building from a role. So we've done logical, we've done role. From a story perspective, the Weavers were a good story perspective build. The witches that I told you about, I said, all right, so here's what I built them up to be: really good in divination, all this other stuff. There's one that's supposed to be a brute capable of just destroying a man. So I made the Annis Hag. I gave her Grape of Master, and I just added 10 to all of her attacks, which is 10 damage is a big difference. You can almost break down the damage a monster deals in terms of how many hits it would take down the tank, right? And I build from the perspective of the tank on damage because the tank's going to be the one on the front lines, and I don't want to buff down my monsters for the wizard and then make the tank feel useless, as the wizard can tank hits too. I want a hit that would, 6 hits on the tank should be like maybe 2 or 3 hits on the wizard, and the wizard is down. So that's a story perspective. Now, a coolness perspective is probably the zombies that I mentioned, or the kobolds. The kobolds that I mentioned, that's a really cool combat, and that's how I built them, to be able to use their burrowing speed. Anyways, good luck, goodbye, and have fun in your games.